The femicide rate in South Africa is 5 times higher than the global average. We have a crisis. Let's get started. Good evening and welcome to the Democracy Gauge. I'm Bongani Bingwa. Welcome to episode 3 of our new program here on SABC 3 and channel 404, marking 25 years of democracy as we run up to the 2019 provincial and national elections. Today, we turn up the ante and focus on gender-based violence and ask if we can turn the tide on this scourge in South Africa. Just a few weeks ago in Pretoria, 33-year-old Claire Stoffels was shot in her mouth, chest, right thigh, lower left leg and in her upper arm, just hours after her child's birthday. The alleged attacker is Stoffels' longtime boyfriend, who has since been arrested. Gender-based violence is widespread in South Africa, despite campaigns like 16 days of activism against women and children, Not in My Name, #MeToo, #IAm, #Rape Stops With Me, and of course last year's Gender Summit. All of those still mean we have a long way to go if we are going to get rid of this ill in our country. And that brings us to our poll question then for this evening. Are we losing the fight against gender-based violence? You can choose from 3 colors. Green, of course, is yes, yellow is maybe, and red is no. Gender-based violence is a scourge in South Africa, affecting women and children from all walks of life. The police statistics for 2017-2018 show that nearly 3,000 women were murdered in our country in that 12-month period. There were over 50,000 sexual offences, and the majority of them were rape. These are just some of the cases that were reported. Countless others are not. And studies show only 1 in 9 rape cases are actually reported. We spoke to a survivor of domestic abuse.
I had fractured ribs, I had lost a baby, thrown with a lock on my back, I had a cane broken on my back. Extreme aggression. I think possessiveness also. My boys went to grade 1 and I could not take them to the first day of school because I had a blue eye. And I think it took me 3 months because from the one blue eye, I had another one.
Celeste Samsudin is 41 years old, has 5 children and is 10 years free from a life of torment. She had 2 sons with her abuser and lived in 3 separate shelters before leaving him for good. Now, back in Cape Town after years in Johannesburg, Samsudin works for one of these shelters that helped save her life. At these shelters, she learnt about her rights, undergone skills development and training, and slowly gained back her self-confidence.
Knowledge is power on my side. Because the more I've learned, the more I've realized what is allowed. So now I've also created boundaries, and with those boundaries, I don't allow people to treat me the way that I used to.
Samsudin is one of a small number of women that break free from a life of violence. But many never do. Most women are murdered by their intimate partners. Last week, former property mogul Jason Roder was sentenced to 20 years in prison for the murder of his wife Susan in July 2016. Roder had an affair his wife knew about. The judge found it was a love triangle that ended in tragedy. In a large portion of such crimes, like sexual assault, rape and murder, it's committed by someone well known to or even loved by the victim. 3-year-old Courtney Peters was raped and murdered by Mortimer Saunders, a man that rented a room in her mother's house. He was sentenced to life in prison. But in the case of 21-year-old Hannah Cornelius, she was murdered by 3 men unknown to her. All 3 had previous convictions, and on that night they were out on a drug-fueled violence spree. Vernon Witboy, Geraldo Parsons and Eben van Niekerk were found guilty last year of killing the student. She was raped repeatedly, stabbed in the neck, and a heavy stone thrown on her head. Life sentences for all 3 were handed down. These are just a few of the recent cases heard in the Western Cape High Court.
It's all things gangster and power in the kingdom of KwaMashu as two families immerse in the contradictory world of church and crime. Uzalo, weekdays at 8:30 p.m. on SABC 1. Mzansi, for sure.
Welcome back. Well, tonight we've got two guests, and the first is Professor Nokuthula Mazibuko, who is an associate professor at the University of South Africa. Prof, a very good evening to you, and thank you so much for joining us. Firstly, we use big words like femicide and gender-based violence. What on earth do we mean? Okay, let's look at gender-based violence. It's the violence that is perpetrated against another person because of their gender. And then from that, you get the umbrellas, which is intimate partner violence, where people are in a relationship, and then you have the one who claims power over the one whom seemingly is powerless. And then there is perpetuation of violence. And then you have domestic violence, where it's violence that happens within the home. It could be from the parent to a child, or the child to the parents. And also people in a relationship? Also people in a relationship. So those are the three terms. And then you have femicide, where now we're looking at the act that has happened between the people who share some kind of intimate relations. Now that violent behavior has escalated to murder. The shocking statistic I read at the beginning of the show was that we are 5 times worse off than the global average. Why is it so bad in this country? Let's look, Bongani, at the history of South Africa, how we have resorted to, how we resolved conflict. We resolve conflict through violence. And this is because of our history, the years of the struggle, that sort of thing. And also look at the norms that we have, the cultural norms that we have, how we live in a patriarchal society where men dominate. And then we have some kind of domination where there is which results to power and control of another person. How much is it also about things like how our culture works, whether that means traditional values or even what we see in the urban communities? We throw again phrases like toxic masculinity. What do those mean and how do they impact on this problem? Okay, let's start with culture, because when things go the other way, we tend to look at what has culture said to us. Culture was, it had intentions of giving respect to the other person. But nowadays, we're looking at that being eroded. So culture is not an excuse in your book? It cannot be. It cannot be. This is an individual choice. What's toxic masculinity? How we identify people. Today, we identify a person through their status in their society. Do they have income? Do they have a stable job? All the things that we seem to say that identifies a person. Can men escape this thing? I mean, we often put the blame on men because quite often they're the ones committing these crimes, not exclusively, of course. But can men escape how they are raised, how they are socialized, in terms of not displaying emotions, in terms of not showing weakness, that sort of thing? Okay, so research shows that perpetrators of violence have been exposed to childhood trauma. They have probably seen their mothers being victims, their sisters being victims as they were growing up. As you say that, I'm going to invite our second guest who's joining us now, and that's, of course, Tumelo Mabena, who himself is a reformed abuser. Tumelo, very good evening to you. Thank you for joining us. Firstly, I can imagine just telling your story must be difficult.
It is always emotionally, because it brings back all the memory that I had all the years.
How did you become an abuser?
It started with me at home being punished. Somewhere my stepfather would be abusive to my mom, and then I'll watch it. And as a boy, I'll be like, I want to make a revenge because this is not my father, but actually he's acting like my father. But now he's taking over everything.
So how did you go from knowing what it did to your mother to being a perpetrator yourself?
I lost my mom when I was 13 years old, and I had my sisters and my brothers, and then we are all alone in the house. And then as you grow up, you start fighting with other boys because I knew that the only way to discipline others. So the moment I started to be in relationships is then when I wanted to be in control, because even when you go in the street, where in my neighborhood, you'll find certain, a friend will tell me, hey, yesterday my mom was being beaten by my dad. So for us, it was something that is normal. So by the time I got into a relationship, it was something that I would know that if she doesn't listen to me, I need to do this.
Because that's how you were raised, that's how you raised your siblings after you had to be the head of the home, and it continued into your relationships.
Yes.
What made you turn around?
As time goes by, there were programs of Brothers for Life. I met a guy by the name of Pule Koto and Xello. They were part of Love Life. And then they used to come to school. I had a lot of talent playing soccer, doing athletics. So I met Xello, and then Xello introduced me to Pule. So Pule has an organization called Heaven's Defense Force that deals with men issues. So he introduced me to the Brothers for Life. But then they were doing medical male circumcision. So along the way, as we went working, so there were workshops organized about this, and then I started to take interest.
So they gave you the tools in a sense and showed you that it was possible to change.
It was, and it wasn't not a forceful change. It was a choice change because they would give me information, take this, read this. They will speak about this without like blaming me, but like acknowledging my problems. They started by listening.
But you too were a victim, actually.
Yes, right? I am a victim and also a perpetrator at the same time. So I'm just one of those two in ones.
Prof, for someone who's watching this conversation and who wants to change and who says, I want to take ownership of my journey, Tumelo shows it can be done.
Yes, and this starts with self-love, self-respect, because when you own your self-love and self-respect, that's when you're able to also give. When
you're confident within yourself, right?
Self-esteem as well. So what we have seen is that people who lack self-esteem, self-love, self-respect tend to violence in order to enforce their own identity.
To impose themselves on somebody else. Dumelo, for someone watching us who wants to change, what's your message? How have you overcome?
I overcome it because of friends who were there for me, like people around the community who wanted to see change. Because the difficult part is there are many campaigns that are happening around, but they're not making any impact because they're there at the top, but at the ground floor, there's nothing that is happening. We are consistently on the ground where I've got these programs that we sit with men after 2 or 3 months where we talk. But the most difficult thing is the only time to sit down with them, you'll find them in taverns, you'll find them doing this, because being there, they don't want to be there. They are escaping their problems.
Well, I'll tell you what is encouraging about what both of you have to say is that actually we each have a role to play. And I think that for me is the biggest takeout of this. All right, looking then at part 2 of our story produced by Mariska Botha, and it continues to highlight the stories of many women and families that are affected by the act of gender-based violence.
The NGO Sonke Gender Justice says good legislation has been implemented since the dawn of democracy. This includes the Domestic Violence Act in 1998 and the amended and adopted Sexual Offences Act in 2007. But while it looks great on paper, implementation to its full potential is a concern. The organisation is calling for a national strategic plan on gender-based violence.
We have the legislation, we have various government departments and civil society that are all working in silos on addressing gender-based violence in some way, but they're not speaking to each other, they're not working together, it's not coordinated at all. And most importantly, it's not actually budgeted for. So what we would like in a national plan is a multi-sectoral plan, a coordinated plan across government departments, with including civil society as well. But most importantly, it has to be costed and it has to be budgeted for. So in the past, we have had plans to try and piece these things together, but we've never had Treasury actually allocating additional funding to ensure that the plan is implemented.
Samsudin says while women can break free and find help like she did, she's skeptical about gender-based violence ever coming to an end in South Africa.
The justice system can do a little bit more, maybe working with the perpetrator, because there's obviously an issue there. So it's a very difficult question. You know, there's definitely ways out for the woman, but I don't know if we can ever eradicate it now.
The St. Anne's Home Group, where Samsudin is now employed, is a lifeline. Often women arrive with their children and only the clothes on their back. Shelters are a crucial tool to empower women to break free. But support for victim empowerment is still greatly lacking, with no universal funding model for sheltering in South Africa.
If we all do our little part in our little corners, collectively, we will actually be able to turn the tide. I've been in this environment for the past 10 years and I've seen fundamental changes, but it's slow. It's what also gives rise to the fact that we cannot actually bring about a greater change than what we have is the fact that there is no legislation that governs victim empowerment, which is where sheltering work falls under. So if you have policy, it dictates budget. And if you have that, there's laws.
Samsudin has a last word of advice for any woman trapped in the cycle of abuse.
If you want to, you can do it. No one can tell you that you can't do it. The assistance is out there, the help is out there. It's up to you to make use of it. And in every area, I know there are people that's out there to help. The only advice I can give is do it for yourself, do it for your kids, because the next time, one of you might not walk out of it. If you did, who's going to look after your kids?
25 years into democracy, there are many challenges still facing South Africa. But one of the greatest must be the unabated violence against women and children. Mariska Botha, SABC News, Cape Town.
Now, if your name is Oma Katrina Iso and you are 85 years old living in the Northern Cape, then it's time for South Africa to hear your story, because that's coming up after the break. Welcome back. Through the Democracy Gauge, SABC News profile a different South African. And tonight, we introduce you to 85-year-old Oma Katrina Iso, one of the last fluent speakers of the San language, Nku. In 2014, former President Jacob Zuma honored her with the National Order of the Baobab for her excellent contribution to preserving a language facing extinction. A year later, Oma Katrina became the first woman to be inaugurated as leader of her people. With constant uphill battles teaching children her ancient language at her school in Appington in the Northern Cape, as we look at our map. She's in this part of the world right there. She's been wanting South Africans to embrace other cultures for an inclusive country. And so we bring you the story of Oma Katrina.
Ek is Katrina Iso. Ek is nou 85 jaar oud. En ek het maar baie swaar gekom toe hier toe. Maar dinge, ek vertrou aan dinge gelyk vir my nou bietjie hulle gaan 'n bietjie aan. My dinge wat ek gedoen het, maar van dit gaan by my. Ek hou, soos ek nog aangaan met die kinders, soos ek nog aangaan met my taal, ek gaan maar nog aan met my taal. Nou ek hoop en vertrou dat die taal nie sal doodgaan nie. Iemand het gister vir my gesê, ek moenie laat die taal doodgaan nie. So ek vertrou, die Here gaan nog my lewe spaar, want dit is, ek sukkel net vir die taal regkom. Die taal aanhou, nie regkom nie, aanhou. Die taal met aanhou lewe. Eendag as ek sterwe dan met die taal, dan moet ek weer die wêreld ken die taal. En hulle gaan aan met die taal.
Die donkie is lei.
Dan gesê ek kobe ja.
Wat dan nog?
Dat lijkt nou zo na een beetje vordering. Nog helemaal lekker voor mij niet, maar dat gaan een beetje aan. Dat gaan een beetje vorderen. Gaan een beetje aan. Zo, ik weet niet. Maar ik vertrouw dat dingen zal helemaal recht komen. Dat dingen zal helemaal recht komen. Mensen zal ook werk krijgen. Kinders, mensen, werkers, mensen wat nog sterk is, wat nog kan werken, zal ook nog helemaal werk krijgen.
Kom aan, Nisan,
Daar is een baie snoerderij, is een baie starigheid. En ik wil dat die zo niet in mijn hart, als ik haastig dat moet aangaan. Ik wil hê mensen met as hulle begin met 'n ding dat hulle aangaan met 'n ding dat hy klaar kom. Daar's baie dinge wat nie lekker is. In Suid-Afrika was so vir my gewees. Met hierdie verkrachting moord ek slaat nie lekker oor dit nie. Mense het die respek vir mekaar, want as hulle respek gehad het, sal hulle nie ander mense moord. As hulle respek gehad, sal hulle nie ander mense, kindertjies, kinders, vernaam hierdie kleinkindertjies, manskinders, verkrag en doodmaak. Dit is 'n ding in Suid-Afrika wat nie vir my lekker is nie. Ek het nie so groot geword nie. Toe ek groot word in my jare, daar was 'n respek teenoor mekaar. Kinders het mekaar gerespek. Groot mense het kinders gerespek en die kinders het die groot mense gerespek. En almal het gerespek vir mekaar. Ek het geel gekies omdat daar nog baie is om te doen. Ek het so 'n bietjie hoop. Ek het so 'n bietjie hoop. Deur die genade van die Here. Dis die Here. As die mense as hulle versag, as hulle bang is vir die werk van die Here, dan sal dinge regkom. Daar sal dinge regkom. So ek het hoop. Ek meen ek staan op daai hoop, hy kan regkom. Hy kan.
So, do you remember where you were in the build-up to Freedom Day 25 years ago? Well, on this day, then ANC Secretary-General Cyril Ramaphosa talked to hostel dwellers at the Glebelands Stadium near Durban.
Last year, we said to de Klerk and his government that the internal stability unit must be pulled out of Bambai. They said they will pull them out and they will leave only 10 or less. They then said that they will bring in the South African Defence Force. That was done. As soon as the South African Defence Force was brought into Bambai, Bambai was the most peaceful area in the whole land. Peace descended on Bambai. We no longer saw Bambai on our TV screens. Bambai was no longer in the newspapers. Bambai was at peace with itself because the internal stability unit had been pulled out. In January, we are now told that the South African Defence Force was withdrawn from Bambai, and the internal stability unit was brought back in full force. It was brought back in full force to make sure that there is complete destabilization, to make sure that our people continue to be killed. And that is what has led to the deaths of the 21 people or so who were killed just last night. And comrades, we must now all say, we have had enough about the internal stability unit. There is not a single force in the country which has killed as many people, which has led to the deaths of so many people like the internal stability unit. I am very distressed, Minangogwami, because I was involved in the negotiations with Ernest Kriel to have the Internal Stability Unit withdrawn. And we are now severely disgraced as the ANC because we have once again not been able to give protection to our own people. And that should never happen. And we are now saying to de Klerk, we want them to be disbanded, we want them to be completely removed, because as we are going through to the elections, we no longer want to hear about 2 people, 4 people, 10 people, or 21 people being killed. Sifuna ukuthi kube nokuthula. Peace must descend, especially here in Natal. We demand peace, we demand stability. Our people want law and order to be maintained, and our people want to go and vote in peace. And that is only going to be possible when the Internal Stability Unit is completely disbanded.
Yet another reminder that ours was a hard-fought and indeed hard-won democracy. Well, thank you for taking the time to watch and participate in our show. Now, for tomorrow's show, we're going to be asking if the bucket system in public schools should be made illegal. Our poll is now open. Choose from 3 colors. Green is for yes, yellow maybe, red is for no. And of course, you interact with our poll on sabcnews.com, and you can answer our question on Facebook and Twitter. Remember always to use the hashtag DG25 and hashtag SABC News. So from me, Bongani Bingwa, until then, ubusuku benzolo. Good night.
Every